In this podcast, we'll talk about leading the eye. There are many different ways to lead the eye in a painting: line, shape, colour, overall design. But there are two traditional forms that have proved to be universally successful, which help to focus the viewer's eye on the area of a painting, which is the main focus. Without a main point of interest, there's no particular area on which to concentrate, but many artists, especially modern artists, don't even try to lead the eye, but rather create a pleasing set of lines, shapes, and forms which are absorbed as an organic whole. All of them are legitimate, but first let's look at those two basic traditional layouts, the first of which is to bring the focus into the centre of the image. The first layout is quite commonly used, perhaps, but not the most satisfying format, although it has served some wonderful artists, such as the late Australian artist Fred Williams, very well. The crossed lines meet right in the centre of the image, and the focus, therefore, is right in the centre of the image. Now, the lines could be moved up and down, so the concentration is away from the centre, but I'm looking at this particular one with regard to Fred Williams. And of course, it does work the same way in portrait format. If either or both these lines are shifted vertically, then the eye will again be drawn to the point where the lines cross. There is a classic variation of that format, widely used in traditional landscapes, in which two or more lines are used to draw one's attention to the focus point by means of a roadway disappearing towards the horizon, or lines of trees, perhaps some figures, or through juxtaposition of trees and other objects along those invisible guidelines. But it has also been used by artists such as Johannes Vermeer, who famously used receding floor tiles to create depth in his interior images. The second commonly used format, which relates directly to the golden mean or golden ratio, can be seen in images and architecture all the way back to ancient Egypt, which is probably why those ancient temples have such a profound effect on us. By dividing the page or canvas into 3 equal lengths, both horizontally and vertically, we create 4 points where the lines cross, and we call them the sweet spots. There is a reason they're called sweet spots in visual art. The golden ratio is regarded as a perfectly harmonious and balanced relationship in a geometric context, and for some reason it's extremely satisfying to our aesthetic senses when areas of interest in an image fall on or close to those 4 points. And again, the same applies in portrait format. In fact, you'll often find that portrait subjects are seated not in the centre of the painting, but slightly to one side and facing towards the opposite side of the frame, just slightly turned usually, not sideways. There's a greater sense of aliveness this way than if the subject is centre stage. And if you do a quick search of political portraits online, you'll notice they almost never confront the viewer. A direct stance can in fact look quite confrontational depending on the subject's overall demeanour, but it also has a tendency to feel somewhat lifeless. So let's look at a number of paintings I've chosen fairly randomly over the hundreds of thousands of wonderful images out there in the world. But I've also added a few of my own simply because I know exactly what was my intention in their execution, as opposed to trying to analyse the minds of others. So let's begin by looking at centre focus, and I've chosen a few works by the late Australian artist Fred Williams. Fred was mostly a plein air painter. He painted outdoors and is known to have taken with him some strings so he could attach it from the corners of the canvas to indicate where the centre was, and everything would focus around the centre, such as in boab trees, where it's really obvious that that's what he's done, or another painting, Coliban Falls. They're smack bang in the centre, no description needed. But here's an interesting application of that idea with his work simply entitled Upway. If you look in along the horizon line, you'll see that the very tallest tree is pretty much in the centre of the painting. And if I put the lines back across, you can see it's actually smack bang in the centre of the painting. The horizon line is halfway up the canvas, which is very unusual, and yet for some reason it works, maybe because all the details are in the lower part of the painting, and that's where the eye focuses. You'll also notice, though, that in addition to marking the very centre of the painting, he would literally create little lines of detail that were parallel to those cross lines. So even though they didn't lead to the centre, they certainly took the direction towards the centre, which means that's where the eye focused. Now, when you look at the whole painting again, you don't even notice what he's done. It's only because I've explained to you that you now can probably see how it's been done. But it absolutely works. It's quite magical if you're a modernist, if you like that type of work, which I do. He's probably my very favourite Australian artist. Let us now have a look at the second idea, well, actually the third idea in my description, which is the roadway effect. It can be reversed, as I said before, but there are some artists who really obviously use this. It doesn't need any description. You have the late English artist Rowland Hilde, who was a wonderful watercolourist. If you look at Paul Cézanne, the French artist, you can see he's literally created a roadway. But in addition, if you look at the top of the fence, or if you look at the shape of the fence, it too progresses downhill towards the focus area, which is the roof of the cottage at the end or at the corner of the roadway. Really, really obvious that he's done it. Here's a little painting of mine where I've done exactly the same thing, only instead of coming entirely from the front of the canvas, I've started it from the left, and it goes in a curve rather than a straight line, but the effect is the same. Here's another painting of mine in which I've used the same effect, and I've deliberately put this one in because this isn't quite so obvious. It's only if I put in the eye lines that you might begin to notice what I've done, which is to create a roadway effect from the bottom right. The edges of the reef, the lines from the edges of the reef get closer and closer together, and then they do a sharp right-hand turn, and you have another roadway effect coming this time not from the bottom or top of the canvas, but from the left-hand side. And let's look again at Mending the Sails by Joaquin Sorolla. I use this image a lot because there's so much you can talk about with his work. It's so interesting. And again, you can see the roadway effect, except that this time we're not using a roadway. The line of the sail gets, the two outlines of the sail get closer and closer together as they get towards the horizon line. And here's an interesting one, and the John Constable painting, the Haywain, which I also use quite a lot because there's so much to talk about. Have a look at the sky this time. Let's look at how the clouds form. I'll show you two sight lines up there, and you can see that the clouds at the top of the image, that is the clouds that would be closer to the viewer in real life, converge down to the horizon line where the clouds are, they look smaller. Now, they're not identical clouds, so the eye doesn't identify it as in looking a whole lot of circles that recede into the distance. But nevertheless, they've been painted in such a way that the puffs of cloud appear to be smaller and closer together down towards the horizon line. It's quite subtle, but it's definitely there. Constable was known as a master of landscape and particularly beautiful clouds. And I've chosen a few works by the late American artist Andrew Wyeth to describe all three aspects of form that we're looking at, starting with Christina's World. This this painting has very little detail as in objects of contemplation. We simply have the figure of Christina and the house up the back with the cottages, and then this huge empty space. And yet, for some reason, the painting is extremely satisfying, and I believe I know why. If we again look at centre focus, and I put those lines back, what you see very obviously is that the figure of Christina follows one of those cross lines, and her head is almost, but not completely, in the centre of the painting. And nothing else, the only other thing that is there is the little outhouse that sits on the same line up the back. And of course, her legs, her left leg is parallel to that line as well. But in addition to that, we haven't talked about sweet spots yet. Remember the sweet spots? If we look at the sweet spots on the painting, then we miraculously see that her hips and legs sits right within the lower left-hand sweet spot, and the buildings sit within the right-hand sweet spot. So we don't need a lot of detail. As long as a painting is well balanced and thought out in terms of form, we can get away with a lot of empty space as long as the focal points are in a way that is aesthetically pleasing. And if we look at it without those, without the form again, without the lines again. Another Andrew Wyeth painting. This one's interesting, Wind from the Sea. Again, if we come back to the roadway effect, you can see that there's a dirt track going from the bottom right, which obviously the lines converge as they go back in the painting. This may be less obvious to you, and that's the line of the lovely curtains, because they converge towards the top of the frame. They appear to be coming towards you because they're further apart. Now, they would be further apart anyway if they were blowing, but it coincidentally creates that impression of them billowing towards you, rather in the way that Sorolla's sails do. And in addition to that, we have a roadway effect, a widescreen roadway effect. And then in addition to that, if we look at the sweet spots, well, the left-hand corner of the window and the left-hand corner of the blind both happen to sit in sweet spots. So if that left side of the painting is not particularly interesting, but because the change in shape is sitting in the sweet spots, it fills out, it balances the painting without drawing your eye to it. If you look at it again without the lines on, it's quite magical. Another Andrew Wyeth painting. I don't know what the title of this one is. The last one was called Wind from the Sea. For some reason I can't find the title, but this one is interesting too because he encompasses all three aspects we're talking about, and you've probably noticed yourself. The roadway effect is pretty obvious from the bottom left-hand side of the frame, but if you go to the little bit of land in the centre right, you'll see that also converges. So we have the converging effect of those two lines. On top of that, in the sweet spots, we have one sweet spot, and the house is sitting in the area of that sweet spot, not right in the middle of it. It doesn't have to be in the middle, it just has to be around that 1/3 section of the painting to be effective. And in addition to that, if you put a centre focus line, and I've only put one, you can see that the edge of the blue timber in the middle follows exactly that line. And if you were to come to the left of that, you'd see that that line is, if you had a parallel line, it would also go straight through the house. So somehow those, again, a huge open empty space with very little in it, but the eye is drawn in such a way that the image feels complete. Wonderful, wonderful artist. And last but not least, I'm going to show you one of my paintings called Organ Pipes. And I'm doing this because I know exactly how I created this image and what I was trying to do. So it's very easy for me to talk to you about it. Now, it's not a very good red, but at the top of the painting, you'll see there's a red roadway effect from the top. It's not clouds, but it's the top of the organ pipes. And if you look at the bottom of the painting, or not quite the bottom, 2/3 of the way down, you see that there's a counterbalancing effect. Now, in music, if you play a melody, in good music, the bass line needs to not follow the line of the melody, but to counterpoint it. That is, when the melody goes up, the bass goes down, and you get this lovely balance between it. And that's what I've tried to do in the painting, to hold it together, because there's no real defining point in this image. So I've done it and I've done it with the use of colour. You can see those pale green rocks going up at an angle like that. And I added another line. If you look at the bottom where the jigsaw, where the tessellated area is of black and cream, it's on the left and it's on the right. And if I put a line following that, you'll see another contrapuntal effect as well. If we look at this isn't the exact center of the painting, but it's, well, across it's pretty much at the center, but the lines aren't going from the corner. But if you compare the lines of the areas where the organ pipes join one another, you can see that they're generally following that cross effect that draws your attention into the center of the painting, even though the center isn't, in this case, the focal point. You're meant to experience it as a whole thing. But those are the lines I have used to stop the eye wandering off the canvas, to lead the eye back in to the center of the canvas. And here it is without the lines again. So I hope you found something of interest there. I hope you'll look for the next video in this series, Art and the Art of Illusion. Thank you for joining me.